Until recently, I used to think conservation meant controlling nature to a degree, keeping everything exactly as it is, perfectly managed. But what if I told you that there's a completely different approach that's actually more effective? One where we basically step back and let nature do its thing. It sounds almost too simple to be true, but it works, and the results are kind of amazing. I'm Grant, and this is Happy Eco News. Today we're diving into rewilding, and I've got to say, some of these case studies were pretty impressive. We'll look at what happens when you reintroduce wolves to a national park, turn failing farmland into a wildlife paradise, and if you stick around to the end, how you can apply these same principles in your own backyard. But first, let's talk about what rewilding actually is. So here's the thing. Right across the planet right now, ecosystems are kind of locked up. They're trapped in this simplified, highly managed state. Think monoculture farms, fragmented habitats, and constant human intervention. We're basically micromanaging nature. Rewilding flips that script entirely. Instead of constantly mowing, draining, planting specific things, and engineering every little detail, rewilding creates space for nature's own dynamics to take over. We're talking about natural processes like predation, grazing, flooding, natural plant succession, and all the other things that used to drive ecosystems before humans got involved. And here's what's really interesting. As climate change accelerates, rewilding isn't just about biodiversity anymore. It's increasingly seen as a way to build resilience, store carbon, and buffer against extreme events like floods and heat waves. Now, I want to be clear about something. Rewilding isn't about trying to recreate some pristine past like we're hitting the rewind button to 1492. It's about giving ecosystems the freedom to recover, adapt, and sometimes, and this is key, surprise us, because nature doesn't always do what we expect. Okay, so we've defined rewilding, but what are the actual principles behind rewilding? Here are a few key ideas. First up is space and connectivity. You need large, interconnected habitat areas so wildlife can actually move and migrate. If you've got isolated pockets of habitat surrounded by highways and development, animals are basically trapped. They can't maintain healthy, viable populations long term. Rewilding connects those dots. Second are the natural processes. The goal is to restore things like natural grazing, predation, water flows, and ecological succession. These processes become the primary forces shaping the ecosystem, not human interventions. We're stepping back. Third, and this one's fascinating, is the effects of keystone species and trophic cascades. By reintroducing apex predators, or large herbivores, you can trigger cascading effects throughout the entire food webs. Change the top and you reshape everything below. Vegetation, prey populations, the whole structure. We'll see some mind-blowing examples of this in just a minute. And finally is minimal ongoing control. After the initial setup, like reintroductions or removing fences, the emphasis is on stepping back. You only intervene when necessary for welfare, safety, or for social reasons. The ecosystem becomes increasingly self-willed over time. This is really different from traditional conservation, which often relies on constant interference, such as regular cutting, controlled burning, predator control, etc., to maintain a specific state. Rewilding says, what if we just let it be? Now, let me tell you about one of the most famous rewilding examples, and honestly, when I first learned about this, I had to double-check the facts because it seemed almost too perfect to be true. Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. In the early 1900s, gray wolves were completely eradicated from the park, and without wolves, elk populations exploded. These elk basically went to town on the vegetation, especially young trees and shrubs along the riverbanks. By the mid-1990s, the ecosystem was pretty degraded, so wildlife managers decided to try something bold. They reintroduced wolves from Canada. And now here's where it gets interesting. As wolves resumed their role as apex predators, elk numbers and behavior shifted. The elk couldn't just hang out in the same spots anymore, they had to keep moving and stay alert. This reduced grazing pressure in key areas along rivers, and suddenly, willows and aspens could regenerate. But wait, there's more. This vegetation recovery supported a resurgence of beavers who hadn't had enough trees to work with before. Beavers built dams which modified waterways, creating habitat for fish, amphibians, and birds. Songbirds benefited from the shrubby vegetation which contained seeds and insects. And this is what scientists call a trophic cascade, a chain reaction in a food web that starts with predators and ripples all the way down to affect plants. Add or remove a top predator and you change the entire system. And here's the cherry on top. Wolf watching now contributes significantly to local tourism. The entire region benefits economically. It's not just good for ecology, it's good economics. The next one's fascinating because it's in the Netherlands, one of the most densely populated countries in Europe, not exactly the wide open wilderness of Wyoming. Oostvaardersplassen is about 6,000 hectares, and that's roughly 1,500 acres of land that was actually reclaimed from a body of water called the IJsselmeer in the latter half of the 20th century. Instead of turning it into conventional farmland, managers tried something different. They introduced free-ranging large herbivores, heck cattle, conic horses, and red deer, to basically replace extinct wild grazing animals. These animals were allowed to shape the vegetation with minimal fencing, minimal management, and the results? The area quickly developed into an internationally important wetland, supporting at least 78 species of birds. We're talking grey-legged geese, spoonbills, white-tailed eagles, species that have been struggling in the region for decades. Now, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Herbivore densities got too high during the harsh winters, leading to animal welfare concerns and public criticism. But here's what's important. Oostvaardersplassen demonstrates both the ecological potential and the societal and ethical complexities of this approach, especially in a densely populated country. It continues to provide crucial lessons for other rewilding projects worldwide. Now let me tell you about one of my favorite examples. It's called the Knepp Estate in West Sussex, England. Knepp Estate was historically an intensively farmed property on heavy clay soils, and honestly, it was struggling. The conventional arable and dairy systems just weren't profitable anymore. So, in the early 2000s, the owners, and this took some serious courage, decided to try something radically different. They adopted a low-intervention wildland model. They released free-roaming herbivores, Old English longhorn cattle, Exmoor ponies, Tamworth pigs, and various deer species. The idea was to let these animals create a shifting mosaic of scrub, woodland, and grassland. Now, fast forward about 2 decades. The transformation has been nothing short of dramatic. Knepp has now become a hotspot for species like nightingales, purple emperor butterflies, and turtle doves, species that were declining across England. But here's the economic angle. The estate completely reinvented its business model around nature-based tourism and education. They offer wildlife safaris, camping experiences, and courses. They've shown how rewilding can actually underpin a new rural economy. It's not just environmentally beneficial, it's economically viable. And that is a game changer. So now let's cross the Atlantic to South America, to Patagonia National Park in Chile. This project centered on the Chacabuco Valley and combined former sheep ranches with adjacent protected areas to create a massive conservation landscape. We're talking about Patagonia's steppe and montane ecosystems, really spectacular terrain. Through a partnership between Tompkins Conservation, founded by the late Douglas Tompkins, co-founder of the North Face, and the Chilean government, they removed fences, reduced or eliminated livestock, and worked to restore native vegetation in overgrazed and riparian zones. With grazing pressure eased and connectivity improved, the park is now focused on recovering native wildlife. This includes pumas, South Andean deer, guanacos, and Andean condors. Plus, they're restoring endemic plant communities that have been degraded by intensive ranching. Ecotourism is central to the long-term vision here. They're bringing visitors into a landscape that's transitioned from heavily grazed ranchland to an emerging wild corridor linking multiple protected areas. It's basically creating an economic incentive for conservation while restoring ecological function. It's a pretty smart approach. Now, our final large-scale example takes us to the Scottish Highlands, a place called the Afric Highlands Project. This is a long-term initiative led by Trees for Life and Rewilding Europe, aiming to restore around 200,000 hectares. That's about 500,000 acres of connected glens, forests, peatlands, and mountains. The focus is on enabling native woodlands, including remnants of ancient Caledonian pine forest, to regenerate naturally. They're doing this through targeted deer management, peatland restoration, and improvement to rivers and wetlands. But here's what I find really compelling about this project. It's deeply community-centered. They're working with local landowners, farmers, and communities to align rewilding with viable livelihoods, cultural heritage, and economic diversification. This isn't about kicking people out or shutting down rural communities. It's about demonstrating that landscape-scale ecological restoration can go hand-in-hand with thriving rural communities rather than displacing them. It's crucial for the long-term success of rewilding. It has to work for people too. So now let's talk about the big picture. What are the actual benefits of large-scale rewilding? Ecologically, you get richer biodiversity, restored food webs, improved soil health, enhanced water retention and filtration, and increased carbon storage and vegetation in soils. And that last one's increasingly important for climate mitigation. Economically, you can develop nature-based economies through wildlife tourism. You reduce certain management costs, especially infrastructure maintenance in remote areas. And you provide cultural and recreational value for both locals and visitors. But, and this is important, there are real challenges. Conflicts can arise over predators and their impacts on livestock. Farmers, understandably, aren't thrilled when wolves or other predators are potentially threatening their herds. There are shifts in land use and local identity. What happens to rural communities built around farming or ranching? There are perceptions of abandonment or untidiness. Rewilded land often looks scrubby or unkempt compared to manicured parks or traditionally managed farms. Some people see that as neglect, not restoration. Animal welfare concerns come up as we saw in the Netherlands. These are complex questions that demand careful, adaptive management and inclusive decision-making. But despite these complexities, rewilding is increasingly recognized as crucial for restoring ecological integrity and building climate resilience. But it's not a simple set-it-and-forget-it solution. It requires ongoing engagement and adaptation. Now, here's what I think is really cool. You don't need 200,000 hectares to participate in rewilding. The same principles that guide Yellowstone or the African highlands can apply at home, just on a smaller scale. When you think about it, when individual gardens, balconies, and verges are planted with native species and then allowed to grow a bit wilder, they start to form wildlife corridors. They connect across streets and neighborhoods, linking larger green spaces and protected areas. You can turn lawns into diverse plantings, and you can leave leaf litter and dead wood. Yeah, it might look a bit messy, but it provides crucial habitat for insects and other creatures. Households can help stitch together fragmented urban and rural landscapes into continuous networks of habitat that support pollinators, birds, and other wildlife. Many small patches combine into corridors and mosaics that provide nature with the connectivity it needs to flourish. And in this way, rewilding at home becomes part of the same movement as rewilding at the landscape scale. Your backyard or balcony might seem small, but when combined with your neighbor's efforts, it can be much larger. It actually makes a real difference. So, what have we learned? Rewilding is fundamentally about shifting from controlling nature to enabling it. It's about restoring natural processes and native species so ecosystems can heal themselves, shape themselves, and provide ongoing benefits. We've seen it work at massive scales, from Yellowstone's wolves triggering cascading ecosystem changes, to the Netherlands creating internationally important wetlands on reclaimed land, to Chile transforming sheep ranches into wildlife corridors. These projects show that when we give nature space, connectivity, and freedom to function, it can recover in ways that surprise us, and often, these ecological benefits come with economic opportunities through nature-based tourism and recreation. And yes, there are challenges. Conflicts over land use, predator management, and animal welfare concerns. But these are solvable problems that require adaptive management, community engagement, and inclusive decision-making. And here's the thing. Whether you have access to 200,000 hectares in Scotland or just a small balcony in the city, you can participate in this movement. Native plants, reduced mowing, fewer chemicals, and more wildlife-friendly practices, it all adds up. Rewilding isn't about perfection or returning to some imaginary past. It's about giving nature the tools it needs to adapt, recover, and build resilience in the face of climate change and biodiversity loss. And myself, I find that pretty hopeful. If you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more about the people and technology driving our green future, make sure to like and subscribe. We post a new video every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.